Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. It feels like it's been a while since my last book review. This time we're reviewing The Demon's Eye by John Delarose. I recently became aware of him and his YouTube channel, and by recently I mean in the last 2 months. This is not unusual for me. I'm continually discovering people in the same space as me. But this isn't about his channel, his videos, or his politics. This is about his book, and my thoughts and feelings on it. I do want to state off the bat that this is an openly Christian book. It is unashamedly, unabashedly, meet you when you get off the plane, Bible-thumping book, which I don't really have a problem with. I cut my reading teeth on Frank Peretti's Messiah, which I thought was a pretty good book. I may have to reread it as I've changed a lot since I started writing and reviewing books. By the way, I write books too. Check them out. Battle Games and its sequel are free today. You guys are free to give me the same treatment I give all authors. That's my ad. I'm going to keep them short unless something special is happening. I'm going back to my old format for reviews, mainly because the format I used last time takes way too long and doesn't let me enjoy the book. And for the most part, I did enjoy this book. But first things first. Like always, I will recap some of the story, then talk about what I liked, what I didn't, and my general thoughts. The story. Jaden is a deserter from the Sorcerer King's army. He's currently in a former enemy country, trying to make a living as a bard. He's playing something called a glitern, which at first I thought was a made-up instrument. But no, it's a weird-looking lute. Anyway, he quickly finds himself embroiled in a fight with a couple of local drunks, which, honestly, he should have seen coming. He spends a lot of time talking about how the locals don't like his people because of the war he's a deserter from. Either way, he's trying to be a pacifist now, which leads him to getting the crap kicked out of him. It could have been worse, and probably would have been if his old friend Savrin hadn't shown up. Savrin was looking for Jaden. He wants to recruit him to go on an adventure with him, something Jaden doesn't want to do. He just wants to be a bard and play his glitern. A glitern he smashed into pieces over a drunk's head. Passively, of course. One would think he could buy a new one with the proceeds from this adventure, but Jaden is a bit of a sad sack and doesn't want to accept the call of adventure. Then, like most of us who wake up in the morning questioning why we have to go to work, hunger and poverty win the argument and he agrees to go. They arrive in a village far to the north. Or, I think it's far to the north. It's icy and cold, and they buy furs almost immediately off the boat. It's okay, this is on the Lord's dime, this being the Lord who's paying for the adventure. They hire a guide and proceed into the mountains. They're almost immediately set upon by an ice spirit. This is almost immediately in literary terms. The spirit then proceeds to kill the guide and is driven away by Savrin, who pulls out his crucifix necklace and compels the spirit by the power of Christ. Which works. We find out that Savrin has joined up with the Church Vigilant, and that's pretty much the reason they're here. The ancients who brought them to this world from the stars also brought their religion, that being Christianity. They brought something else with them, but we're not quite there yet. The journey they're on is to find an enclave of the ancients, which is located somewhere in these snowy mountains. This job has become a lot harder now that the guide is dead. Undeterred, Savrin refuses to turn back. Stumbling around in the snow, they find the cave they were looking for. It looks like the Ancient Ones lived in this place in little cells along the cave wall. Then, Jaden and Savrin are attacked by a troll. An undead troll, I think. They struggle to get into one of the cells. Apparently obesity is still a problem. Here we find some old clothes and a harp. The troll tries to get in the room with the party and has the same difficulty. I was joking about the obesity before, but this is the only issue I could see with the troll. Jaden takes the harp in hand, as he didn't bring a sword, for some reason. The troll breaks into the room and Jaden plays a song, which again, for some reason, hurts the troll. He keeps playing until the troll passes out from pain. Then instead of finishing off the troll and looting this place full of ancient wonders, they grab some old clothes and leave. And that's where I'll leave off the story. Moving on to my likes. First off, Savrin is probably my favorite character. He's a bit inconsistent in tone, but he's a rogue. He's meant to be. The story is pretty clean. I don't mean in a puritanical way. It's also that, but that's not what I mean. I mean when I was reading it, I had a fairly good idea of what was going on. You'd be surprised how often that's an issue. I've taken to doing my reading out loud when possible, and there are parts of this book that genuinely sound good when read aloud. I'm not kidding. If I had the time, I would have brought up a live stream and done a live reading. There are some problems here and there, but only a few things that stopped me in the middle of reading. Next is the from another world aspect. So yes, this is a fantasy series that is based on a science fiction concept. I like the idea that mankind tried to escape from Earth and its sinful nature, only to bring it with them to the new world. We don't get a lot of details into why everyone fell into a medieval-style society, but then we don't need to explain everything, which I have to give the author credit for. He doesn't go into excruciating details about every little thing. Sadly, there is a drawback to this, which I will get to later. That said, we're not given a reason why magic is now a thing, or really how it works, but I get the feeling we're not supposed to know. Moving on, let's talk about the supernatural. We're introduced fairly early to spirits. Some are ghosts, some are natural, and some are incidental. I like that they don't feel human. Even when they're ghosts, they don't feel like they're human. There's a part where the team is faced with an amalgamation of the ghosts of some pirates. They waited for hundreds of years for a royal to step foot into their town. Once one does, they capture her. They do give the heroes time to address their grievances, but they do not allow the heroes to take the royal with them. For the most part, the supernatural in this is pretty unforgiving. The monsters want nothing more than to eat the heroes, the other races pretty much want to kill the heroes, and the evil sorcerer is just that. Evil and a sorcerer. It's not complicated, but it's nice not to see the common, "they're just misunderstood" trope. Also, for the most part, I thought the ending was satisfying. Was it great? I can't say that. The story was a bit too simple and the characters a bit too flat for the ending to be great. But it was satisfying. It was like a decent meal that you can't really complain about. But in this case, I kind of can. Don't get me wrong, the ending was satisfying, but it did leave me a bit disappointed. I can't really be mad. This feels like what YA was supposed to be. It's not horribly offensive smut. It's standard fantasy with a Christian twist. But I'll talk more about that later. Let's get into my dislikes. First of all, Jaden. I don't like the main character. At the start of the book, he's a real downer. I get he's in a bad situation, but he's just such a whiner. He's constantly down, always wants to go back and get more people, and doesn't want to fight. I mean, I get all that. The problem is he feels like a regular person and not in a relatable way. And that's the thing, he's not a regular person. He was slated to take a top spot in the Sorcerer King's army. He was supposedly a great fighter and leader at some point. I get that he's gone a bit to seed, but that doesn't really fit with the fantasy aesthetic. Most of the explanation we get for this is that he saw some atrocities in war. I don't want to downplay that. PTSD is a serious matter, but I don't get that vibe from Jaden. He seems more bored and uncomfortable with the idea of being violent. It feels more like Savrin is getting his lazy roommate to help him clean up and pay the bills, rather than Jaden dealing with his own problems. By the end of the book, he feels flat. Yes, he's resolute in what he must do, but now he feels like Sunday school. He only does what he has to because he believes in God's plan. There's nothing wrong with finding religion, but he's left his personality behind. Maybe I'm looking too much into this, but Jaden does not feel like a main character. I can't sympathize or empathize with him because he feels wooden. Which brings me to my next problem. I have trouble connecting with most of the characters in this story. Jaden isn't the only character who's a bit wooden. Most of the characters are. They do have a few standout moments, but nothing that really makes them pop. If the cast weren't so small, I may have started mixing them up. I said Savrin is my favorite character, and I meant it. He's the only one who has his own personality. He cracks jokes. They aren't always good, but it feels like he tries. He's quick to violence, but it makes sense for his character. The monk would probably be the number 2 most likable character. He's really religious and prays all the time, but that makes sense. He's a monk. He does have some cool abilities. I think if he'd been fleshed out more and allowed to grow, he would have been much more likable. As for Bronwyn, well, she's Bronwyn. At times, she feels more like a plot device than a character. Her romance with Jaden is probably one of the hardest parts of this read. Granted, I've not found many stories where romance was done convincingly. Maybe because flirting isn't a spectator sport. The romance feels like reading someone else's text messages. Moving back to the spiritual stuff, I said before I like supernatural stuff in my stories, and while I enjoyed much of it here, some of it's hard to follow. So some of the spirits react poorly to the mention of Jesus, others do not. There's a heavy church theme throughout the book, and it feels very American Protestant. I can't fall on that too hard. I grew up with it. It's just not my cup of tea. I'm usually not one to say we need more exposition, but in this case, a little may have helped. It would have been nice to get some stories about some saint or a person of the church who discovered how to do this or that. What I mean is, the monk basically has magic and we have little explanation as to why. A bit more world building is what I'm asking for. I know Christianity is already well known in this world, but it would have been nice to see how it has adapted to the new world. Its history in this place, how it fits in with everything, but I can't say too much more without major spoilers. Moving on to some technical problems because I want to be pedantic. Really, these are just things that bothered me. In the second half of the book, we're introduced to the Mer King. He plays a big role in the second half of the book. He's also not a terrible character. If anything, he needed to be played up a bit more, made more ostentatious. I say this because when we're introduced to him, we're told he's noticeably bigger than the other merfolk. I may be misremembering because I didn't write it down, but I think he was supposed to be like 3 times the size of the other merfolk. I didn't write it down because I didn't think we were going to have him continue with us for the rest of the book. I was also led to believe that the mermen were bigger than our main characters, which would have made the Mer King really, really big. I don't think I'm the only one who forgot his size, because even though this behemoth of a manfish is traveling on a cart across the land, no one mentions it. I feel like this should have been the first thing out of people's mouths. Everywhere they go, people should be freaking out about this 12-foot tall fish man in the party. Everyone just treats him like he's a normal person. But he's not. Even if I'm misremembering his size, they're still traveling with a big fish man. We get a few cases of mild surprise, but that's not enough. On top of that, he's a king, a foreign dignitary. He should act like it. Also, another small dislike, there's a part where they fight underwater and they're given shields. Shields would be terrible underwater. They would be a major hindrance. Here's a giant flat piece of something hard enough to stop a weapon. Good luck maneuvering! Even if it could be used to great effect, and I have no doubt that it could, I feel like it should take some substantial training. Having this big flat piece of something is going to mess with your ability to move underwater, and I feel like it should have been noted. Next is Jaden's harp. He just leaves it behind. After the second time it might have been useful to have and he didn't have it, I'm surprised he didn't attach it to a sling and throw it around his neck. It's basically a supernatural weapon, and it's always in a case back at the cart. It's possible it wouldn't have worked for everything, and maybe he felt like he needed to keep it hidden, but I still think it makes more sense to keep it on him. Last in my dislikes are the parts I had trouble following. There are 2 to 3 parts where I was sure I had missed something important. Usually this occurred during action scenes. I was sure it was me, until I got to the part with the boats. Without spoiling too much, there's a part where they take a boat out onto the lake to rescue someone. We're told specifically the man they're rescuing lost his boat. Then, somehow, he's back in his boat when a monster attacks. This might have been an oversight, but it did make me stop and flip back a few pages to make sure there was only one boat. I didn't like that because for the most part I was enjoying the story. Moving on to my thoughts. So as I said before, I started out reading Frank Peretti. I really enjoyed his work, and one of the things I liked about it was how he worked Christianity into the story. Yes, there is a way to do that. And yes, there is always the trope of, I found God, so now you can't hurt me. That's a bit hard to get away from in modern Christian fiction. In this book, it's a little heavy-handed. It's to the point it feels like Jaden converts to Christianity more from peer pressure than actual conviction. Basically, he's surrounded by very verbose Christians, and so gives in and allows them to baptize him. Maybe my ideas have changed given my own recent religious explorations, but I feel like more time should have been spent on this part. Not that I can really fault Jaden for giving in to peer pressure. He's seen it stop supernatural stuff cold. Even he says something to the effect of it being protection, which is really hard to argue with. If visible spirits were rampaging around and you could stop them with the pronouncement of your faith, the church would never lack for followers. That said, the story is not dark enough in my opinion. There's a lot of chances for some truly terrible stuff to happen. It would have even made sense for a threat of such things to happen. But they don't. They're not even hinted at. I don't want to get into these because they're very un-YouTube friendly and they are major spoilers. The problem is doing this diminishes the stakes. I'm not feeling the threat when clearly evil people are only kind of evil. Just so you guys know, murder isn't the only kind of evil. Honestly, this reads more like a role-playing session, as if each character had been in someone's D&D campaign and everybody but one player was kind of new to it, and then halfway through they got access to some weird module. That's not a bad thing. I've seen some great stories come out of tabletop games. This one just feels like it needs a bit more fleshing out and a bit more care. Honestly, the story would have been better from Savrin's point of view. Jaden is just a bit too broken and a bit underweight character-wise. While Savrin is an honest believer, he struggles with the tenets of his new faith. He sins and gives in to temptation. He's a dangerous man in a dangerous world, and a lot of Jaden's inconsistencies would be easier to take from someone else's point of view. I'll also say Savrin did nothing wrong to the Warlord. That's my opinion, and I'll stick by it. Lastly, and I hate to say this, proofreading. This is something I need to hire someone to do as well. I'm not talking about editing here. There were a number of typos in this book that were a bit jarring. I started noting them down when I could. Not to go over them here, but to give to the author should the chance arise. Granted, I only have about half of them written down. I know what this is like as I still have a list of my own to take care of. These didn't break the book. I may not have noticed so much if I didn't do reviews and I didn't take notes. Most books have typos. It's why I'm going to be using a proofreader on top of an editor from now on. Final summary. So what's my final judgment of this book? While I have made a much longer list of dislikes than likes, that's not uncommon. We tend to notice stuff like that more. The book was an easy read. It needs a bit more fleshing out, maybe a few more beta readers to catch some of the harder to follow parts, but it was an enjoyable book. It's deceptively longer than you would think. That said, it doesn't really drag. If anything, it goes a bit too fast. There are a few places I think the story would have benefited from a slower approach. That said, none of these problems are book-breaking, and if you're looking for Christian fiction, you'll probably enjoy it. Good luck, everyone.